biggest misconception is the same one I grew up with. And I came from an enlightened home. But I'll tell you, as a child, I watched a lot of television. I'm not proud of it, but it's a fact, and we shouldn't deny facts. I watched a lot of television, and I loved the cowboy and Indian programs, the movies, the weekly TV shows. I watched them all. And when I watched them, I'm telling you the honest to God truth, I hated the Indians. And they weren't called Indians, they were called savages. I hated them. I would watch the movie, and I remember one movie in particular where the settlers, the Jim Bowies, the Davy Crockett's, the Daniel Boones. I remember in one of them, they took balls of fire they made, I think, from hay, and they hurled them on the teepees of the Indians or savages and incinerated the Indians and savages. And I was cheering. I was exhilarated. When as a kid, we watched the famous movie, Remember the Alamo. It was a Walt Disney film. And in the Alamo were all the great heroes of the West. Jim Bowie was there. Daniel Boone, I think, was there. Lieutenant Rip Travers was there. And I hated Santa Anna. I hated the Mexicans. Look what they did to those poor, heroic cowboy figures for me. I didn't know, you live in a different era until the 1970s, as a consequence of the Cultural Revolution our country underwent in the 1960s. The very first film that depicted Native Americans in a positive light, it was called Little Big Men, and it starred Dustin Hoffman. And that in itself was a cultural revolution. I suddenly realized I was rooting for the wrong side. I didn't know that those folks in the Alamo were trying to steal Texas from Mexico. I thought Mexico was trying to steal Texas from us. So when you ask what's the biggest misconception in our understanding of the Israel-Palestine conflict, it's the same misconception that all Americans suffered until the 1970s. By the 1970s, I was already 20 years old. I mean, I'm not talking about a 5-year-old in front of the TV set. It was only at that point that I realized we were stealing their land. They weren't stealing our land. We were stealing their country in the case of Texas, not vice versa. And I think the biggest misconception is, in the grand scheme of things, the big picture, who is the victim and who is the perpetrator? That's the misconception.